You're talking about an institution that was called by the membership as the jewel of the crown. To see it go away or to see it not functioning, I think is very sad, because we are now at a crossroad. And I think now the creation of new disciplines on economic law is becoming more and more important.
History tells us that we should care. If you look at history, you can see that the rise of international adjudication corresponds to the reflux of the use of force in international relations. When trade regulation derails, in fact, what comes next is indeed not only trade wars, but war. And if we don't find ways of settling disputes peacefully, then trade will become more a trigger for more tensions. And also multilateralism is at a threat nowadays. And I think that the main challenge of the next decade is mostly to save what exists in order to preserve the best chances for peace. So I'm not speaking exclusively about an adjudicatory system, but nevertheless about an approach which favors settling dispute peacefully.
The central practical problem is that the United States in particular has gone dissatisfied with especially the appellate body for many years now and decided to act upon this, and using a provision in the agreements that require consensus, decided that it could dismantle the appellate body in response, which means that the WTO can no longer provide the kind of binding dispute settlement for which it became famous and which made it a strong organization from the perspective of the various countries.
Probably it's not possible to get the US back into a revised form of a two-tiered system as we know it today. My thinking is that, and that's actually quite an interesting experiment, a number of members have created an alternative dispute settlement system, including European Union, Japan, China, and many other, I would say, systemic countries. They actually have had a good experience with the existing system and they want to continue that. And so I think if the system is able to attract more members down the road, we will have a system that works for part of the membership. And I think that's probably in the short term the only real possible pragmatic solution.
Other countries have understood the seriousness of the US concerns and have tried to make accommodations so that they can still have a functioning WTO system. But in the long term, what they would like is to get the US back into the system, participating in WTO dispute settlement, preferably with the appellate body. But I think at the moment, nobody's sure whether that can be done. So what governments are trying to do for now is come up with temporary solutions, patches to keep the system going, but with the hopes of some long-term, resurrection of the system, maybe in a new form.
I think that a lot can be done without necessarily amending the treaties or doing things formally. Much of these community has developed practices, and it's on those practices, on written practices, that we need to act and think about. One, I think that if we continue to use and refer to precedent, well, we need to be very critical in the way we do it. So precedent is important, but it's not a holy writ. It's not something that is untouchable, also because if you never touch a precedent, then it bloats. It becomes very difficult to manage. So that is not done by amending the treaties. It's done by way of practice. The second thing is that, yes, we need greater kind of porosity between the inside and the outside of the institution. And the third thing is transparency. So for a long time, the dispute settlement process was kind of shrouded in mystery. One saw only the final point, the report being issued. I think that great many steps can be taken to make the process more transparent.
The existing rules of the WTO actually do provide sufficient ways to deal with the challenge that are raised by China's state capitalism. And we look at the history of China's SOE reform, and we also look at how to creatively use the existing rules in the WTO to deal with the China challenge. And this is partly in response to a very popular narrative nowadays that the existing rules of the WTO are insufficient and therefore we need new rules. And we argue that actually you do not need new rules.
So it feels a little bit like a dead end, right? Depending on what you're looking at and what day of the week or the month you're looking at it, it will feel a little bit like a dead end. But first of all, international trade governance is not dead, it's just happening in a different way. Parties seem to be resolving the disputes. And at the same time, if you're in an existential crisis but something really works, you try to figure out in that context, what is it that works about it? And can we replicate it in the more problematic areas? So with respect to dispute settlement, should we be making dispute settlement more diplomatic or less formal? Should we create different streamlines and mechanisms that operate independently of each other, that can be more efficient in a way, right? Is it an efficiency problem? Is it a political capital problem? Do we need to get some people back on the table? What types of incentives do you give certain countries and certain alliances to go back to the WTO? Perhaps finding mechanisms that work for those giant trading partners, maintain the legitimacy to the system, because you can't just cater to one or two parties. You have to maintain some type of legitimacy, and you have to be a little bit faithful to your past. So whatever has happened with the WTO, there's an acquis, as we say in the European Union, so that acquis need to be brought forward, and how does that need to happen? So it's a multi-dimensional game, it's a multi-dimensional chess. And I'm not sure there is an end to the actual game, and I'm not sure there's one solution that will win them all.
So what is happening is that the United States, it sees itself as having a particular role in the world of being sort of a global superpower, and it feels now threatened. I think that's fair enough to say. You can just go through what Congress has been saying by China, the rise of China.
Originally, for the past 75 years, security was the outlier. It was the exception. Predominantly governments focused on economic relations. What we haven't seen until recently is governments feeling comfortable for the first time to bring complaints to the WTO to argue that those security measures are actually inconsistent with the WTO. With the WTO rules. So that is one of the new changes we're seeing right now with how the multilateral trading system works. And a part of this is technology is just evolving very quickly. Another aspect of this is that how we conceive of defense and security is very much changing. When I say we, I mean governments and companies, firms, producers. So the way we fight, we went, if you think about gunpowder diplomacy, trench warfare, proxy wars, now we're in this new state where war is really fought through the ability to control supply. The idea of economic security isn't new. We've heard of those concepts being put together. I think what we're seeing now is that governments are learning that it's not just about the sort of straightforward military or defense interests. And in fact, one of the big criticisms of some of the very first reports that we saw come out of the World Trade Organization that defined essential security interests in a really narrow, tight way, close to military, close to that traditional sense of security. Well, a lot of critique came out of that saying, I'm sorry, but how do you not see climate as a security issue? How do you not see, other aspects of human rights abuses, different aspects that today we conceive of as a security issue? And so we have to be really careful, I think, to be able to map out how something could be an urgent global issue like climate action versus the sort of domestic concern allowing governments to ensure that they are prepared for their own self-defense and preservation and the safety of their people. We sort of have to begin to navigate what those different aspects are, and then in turn the government and firm responses that factor into thinking about that risk.
So I think we actually have to think very creatively about how these types of trade disputes can be handled within the current climate. And I think that increasingly calls for other alternative types of negotiations, conciliations, good offices, and experimentation, unfortunately. So there's no concrete, we have to do plan A and that will solve all of our problems. CUSMA, TMAC, USMCA, as we say in the United States. The United States now can enforce labor rights commitments, not just against trade partners, but corporations and trade partner countries. So we see the United States closing its borders to specific facilities in Mexico for, based on the United States view, violating labor rights. So this system effectively is becoming exactly what developing countries were concerned about it becoming when they stopped the WTO. We do know now that the system as it is working is in favor of developed countries. It's being used against developing countries. It has nothing to do with labor rights, and we need a better system in the future.
The USMCA is working well, and so far the disputes have gone through the system in a swift and a very smooth way. And that is very good for the system. So could the USMCA become a substitute for WTO, and whether countries will go regional instead of multilateral?
I think one of the major issues is that we focus too much on the formal dispute settlement system itself. We have this obsession of bringing the appellate body back online. We are trying to figure out the technical legal issues that we can fix to appease the United States' concerns over adjudication. But I think we need to look at other aspects of the WTO, the regular work that happens in the many committees that do the day-to-day monitoring and transparency function of the institution that actually do a lot to diffuse tensions between members. And I think that the big thing that makes it successful in many ways is that it doesn't involve lots of lawyers. And so what you see in the committees are often regulators that come in, and you get regulators that talk to each other about measures. Sometimes you can resolve issues there on the margins, and that works out just great. So I think it's an important part of the dispute settlement system overall. It's not a replacement for it, but it's something that can support its function day to day.
The question that I'm really interested in is why those safeguards, institutional safeguards, which were present in the WTO, why were they not used? But I think that's something that needs more attention. There's a lot of attention on what the appellate body did wrong. There's less attention on why did the WTO membership, which had certain tools available to correct the development of the law, why did it not use those tools? And just briefly, what are the tools? The most important one is that of an authoritative interpretation. So the WTO membership could have adopted an authoritative interpretation correcting some of the rulings that were adopted by the appellate body. And I think we need to look at mechanisms to introduce a bit more automaticity into the process. So where, for example, the dispute settlement organs, a panel, or the appellate body, if it still exists, would be able to remand interpretive questions to the membership and say, look, these are the interpretations, you have to take a decision. And there has to be some automaticity so that the membership has to, through a vote, somehow decide on which interpretation should prevail. So in order to rebalance the institutional, the roles of the legislator, which is supposed to make interpretations, and the dispute settlement organs, which are supposed to solve disputes.